I was walking up the East Coast Sea, I saw a big city there in front of me. So many lights and shiver up my spine, that sure had a pretty skyline. Hey friend, what's that town called? New York City.
Good day, everybody. This is Gary Fielder from Denver, Colorado, coming at you from my private law office over here on Colfax and Stewart Street. Maybe one of these days we'll post a couple of pictures of this beautiful building. And I'm sitting in my office doing this podcast, and we've been a little delayed on our last transmission only because I've been in trial literally back to back to back with some success, by the way, some of which we may talk about on this podcast or another one. In fact, we've got a good podcast coming up, at least as an idea, to interview my client who was just acquitted yesterday of attempted murder, 2 counts, and first-degree assault in a jury trial in Denver, Colorado, regarding his conduct in defending himself in his own kitchen with a firearm against 2 would-be attackers. Very interesting case. A good client, young African-American man, in some trouble in his younger life, and so I'd have to get his consent to have him come on the show. But I think that'd just be very interesting to see it from his perspective now that the trial's over, and would give me a chance to pontificate a little bit about the criminal justice system as I see it, not only from the big town of Denver, but all the other counties that are outlying have their own courthouses, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. So before we begin, let me give everybody an update on the class action lawsuit, which, as most people know, was dismissed over a year ago now. It's been about 13 months ago that the lawsuit was dismissed. We filed an appeal in the 10th Circuit. Our opening brief, their response briefs, and they are Dominion Voting Systems, Inc., Facebook, Center for Tech and Civic Life, we call them CTCL, and some other actors that I'll mention here in a minute, but those are the 3 primary defendants that were dismissed out of the lawsuit, against whom we filed an appeal in the 10th Circuit, and that's been fully briefed. Their responses have been filed and our replies have been filed. However, at the beginning of the case, we named several individuals such as Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, and others from Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin. We named those people in their individual capacities, but in light of trying to bring the case in Denver, we dismissed them out relatively early in the cases. However, the attorney generals from, not Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, and Pennsylvania all entered their appearances on behalf of the governor in his or her official capacity, or the secretary of state of their respective state in his or her official capacity. And we kept telling them and the magistrate involved in our case, why is the attorney general here? Why are they here? Those offices haven't been sued. Those individuals have been named in their individual capacity. They don't have presidential immunity, but once we dismiss them out, the states of Pennsylvania and Michigan, not Georgia, Wisconsin, never entered their appearance, despite the fact that we served several individuals up there as well. They were dismissed out as well, but their attorney general stayed out of the fight. Good for them. However, after the case was dismissed, the state of Pennsylvania, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the state of Michigan both filed motions to sanction myself and co-counsel Ernie Walker. Those motions were granted, along with other motions that Dominion filed, Facebook filed, and CTCL filed, to sanction the attorneys for filing this so-called frivolous lawsuit. The lawsuit, as again most of you know, is a class action lawsuit brought by voters. Initially, I think it was 8 plaintiffs from 5 different states Our amended complaint was 160 plaintiffs from 38 different states. And then by the time the case was dismissed, we had over 500 plaintiffs from 49 states. So the whole purpose and thrust of the lawsuit was from the voters of these separate states suing for the violation of their civil rights by these otherwise private entities that we alleged were transformed into state actors by their conduct involved in the 2020 presidential election, not nationwide, but in a substantial number of states, CTCL, Dominion, and the like. So we still feel like we're on high ground. We still feel like we're going to win the substantive appeal, much less the appeal on the sanctions issue. The magistrate who dismissed the case originally found that the case was frivolous in August of 2021 and then issued a final order in November of 2021 imposing $180,000 of attorney's fees on Mr. Walker and myself. So we appealed that decision. The opening brief has been filed. The response brief on behalf of the Commonwealth and Michigan and on behalf of Dominion Voting Systems and Facebook and CTCL, their response briefs on the issue of the sanctions order has been filed, and now our reply is due, and we'll be working on that. Probably we'll have it filed by the time of the next podcast. So it's all in the process. We realized through the response filed in this latest round, they quoted their Fielder principle. In one of the footnotes, they took what I said in these podcasts and put it into the brief. And I found that was interesting. It's fine. I don't regret anything I said, or I don't regret anything we've done. I've made some mistakes throughout the case. That's beyond doubt. But I don't really regret anything we've done in terms of having brought the case. But I just feel bad for the associates that have to watch this. I'm sure they're grinding through these podcasts. I'm sure they just must be thinking that I'm just some sort of nut talking about the sovereign powers of our citizens here. But I'm sorry that you have to go through this. And I don't expect you to learn anything. Believe me, I'm not presumptuous enough to think that anyone's learning anything. But I think people enjoy these shows, and I think that people are learning a little bit about their own power, and not just how that power can be exercised, but how they feel about themselves and who they think they are and how they view themselves. And in that sense, when I learned about my own powers, I was filled with a sense of pride. I was filled with the sense of duty and responsibility. No longer was I this lowly creature just walking around aimlessly, but I was a citizen of a great country with all the duties and responsibilities that comes along with knowing that the power of the country is in me. It's in my heart. It's in my brain. It's within my power to do my little part. And even if I don't want to do my part, I have to. I didn't want to do the podcast this morning because I was just so tired from having done all these jury trials. But I just had to muster the energy, stare in the camera, and the words come out of my mouth. It's all good. It's what we all have to do, our little part in trying to keep this country alive. And it's not just about voting. It's about ensuring one's right to counsel. That's why I object to these sanctions so much. Whether the case is frivolous or not, and you think about it, voters who are looking at otherwise private entities who now we know interacted in a way that violated not only the rights of Republicans, but libertarians, third parties, and Democrats who are vested in an honest system, all their rights were violated. Well, how would those rights be enforced if the citizens themselves, through officers of the court, don't bring their claims in where? Federal court, because there's so many states involved, and it was a national election. I just don't see where that was frivolous. But if the 10th Circuit says it's frivolous and then even imposes the cost of the appeal, well, we're going to have to go to the Supreme Court, but they're not required to take the case. So whatever happens in the substantive appeal and whatever happens in the appeal with regard to the sanctions, I just don't see stopping. I just don't see giving up. Even if it costs me my law license, even if it costs me my life, I would rather not be tortured and I would rather my family not be hurt. But that's what we're talking about. So in the end, we're still in it. We're still filing briefs, and we haven't had the matter scheduled for oral argument, and there may not be oral argument. No decisions have been rendered by the 10th Circuit, and they could just render their decision without oral argument. But if oral argument is set, of course, we're going to be talking about that and announcing the date and looking forward to that in terms of being able to talk to the 3 justices that are appointed to the case in the 10th Circuit to hear not only the substantive appeal, but the issue concerning the motions for sanctions. So the responses will be filed on the website, DominionClassAction.com. Review those. Review the other briefings that have taken place and get yourself familiarized with that situation. So other than that, I'm mindful that the parties are listening. I welcome anyone who wants to listen to this podcast. I think it was the last podcast that we were talking about the rights of prisoners to speak. And I made the point that, well, maybe even a prisoner has a right to do a podcast. And then it wasn't 3 days later that I saw a show, it was like on PBS or some sort of public access channel, where this person was editing, producing, and distributing the rap music of prisoners who were recording their voice, sending it legally to whoever they wanted to send it to, and the music was getting out. So within just 72 hours of at least my own self making that comment on the last podcast, it was affirmed that yes, prisoners do have a right to a podcast. Rap music is their podcast. Writing a letter to a congressman or a friend or trying to get it published in the paper, you could do that from a jail cell. You could do that from your home. You could do that from wherever you're at. So all of these rights that we talk about in terms of being a United States citizen, being a human being and having human rights, they should transcend all the way to the prisoner. Because if they don't transcend all the way to the prisoner, then what are they worth? And you think, well, no, the prisoner has given up all of his or her rights. No, they haven't. They haven't given up any of their rights. They have an absolute human right and constitutional, thereby sovereign right, not to be treated unusually or cruelly. That's right in the Constitution. Remember, Richard the Lionheart, King Richard, was captured and ransomed by another kingdom on his way from Jerusalem back to England or France. He was captured and held for ransom. King Charles' head was cut off. King Charles' head was cut off. So every now and then, the sovereign does get captured and held for ransom, but they're still sovereign. Every now and then, the sovereign's head gets chopped off, but they're still the sovereign. But back in those days, there was only one sovereign, king or queen, or maybe jointly, William and Mary. However, the subjects were the subjects, and they didn't have any rights. They didn't have any say. So when you're a United States citizen, you're always a human and you have human rights. But when you're a United States citizen, that's a huge deal. And so, for example, even the gentleman that I was representing over the last week who was acquitted, well, like I said, he's had a couple of other cases in his life, there's a couple of felonies on his record, so he can't vote. But that doesn't mean he's not one of the sovereign people of this country, even in his state. Even if he had gone to prison, even if we'd lost the trial, his status would not have changed. So that's important. That's important for all of us to recognize and all of us to know, because all of us, all 7 billion of us, are free and autonomous beings. That's 7 billion of us. Only about 330 or so million of us are United States citizens. So that's a major privilege and honor, but it comes with a lot of duty and a lot of responsibility. Now, where are you? The last program we talked about being on private property or public property. Well, if you're in your private property, you're in your kingdom. And it might just be a little bedroom or an apartment complex, but that's your kingdom and people can't knock down the door without a warrant signed by a magistrate. You had to have done something wrong. You are free. You are free to utter. You are free to sing. You don't want to bother your neighbors, but you can write your lyrics. You can read the books that you want to read, however esoteric they may be. You can do all of those things. You can engage in a personal relationship with just about anybody you want to engage in. That's your sovereign right. All those are rights that are bestowed upon us, not only by our Creator, but the government that we created to protect those rights. But when we leave that property, it almost doesn't matter whether the property that we're on later is public or private. We're not on our property. Okay, so you're either on someone's private property, someone else's private property, even your brother's, or you're on some form of public land. Now, you still have all your rights, but just remember that you're restricted on those public lands with regard to reasonable licensing. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I'm of the mind that although you have the right to travel, a typical sovereign would sit in the back seat and let the driver drive, but the driver's got to have a driver's license. And if you really just have an affinity about registering your cars and giving the government the car's VIN number, and you don't want to pay the licensing fee, and you don't want to wear the plate with the little red sticker because you think that that's all just too much government power. Well, if you have your own private land and you have your own roadway, you don't have to have any of that. You don't have to have a driver's license. You don't have to have any of your cars registered. You don't have to have license plates on the cars that you drive all around your private property or by agreement someone else's private property. But when you get up on that public roadway, well, you could rent a car. You could hire a limousine company. You don't have to use your motor vehicles to get up on that public roadway. You have all your sovereign rights, but you have to give up the fact that when you send your children to public school, within reason, I understand why the school board should be in control and the parents should all have input, and that's what we do on a daily basis. That's why we have elections. That's why all of this is being strained as we speak. I know a thing or two about critical legal studies. We'll talk about that. However, that's people in their political forum trying to work it out. The bottom line is when you send your child to a private school, well, they're going to have a curriculum that's based more on what that community wants. If you send your children to the public school, there's an element that you can't control. There's no religion allowed. When I was a child, I grew up in a sort of a conservative fundamentalist religion. We went to church on Saturday, and we didn't celebrate Christmas. We didn't celebrate Easter. We were kind of like, Seventh-day Adventist, but we weren't. We were called the Worldwide Church of God. And I was in this, religion up until I was like 12 years old. Well, back in the 60s, they used to have Christmas programs. Well, my family didn't celebrate Christmas, so I would sit down in the library while they did their Christmas program. Well, they don't do Christmas programs anymore. Why? Well, because we figured it out, that in public schools, you have all these people from different religions, not just people that have fundamentalist Christian beliefs, but Muslim beliefs or Judaic beliefs or Hindu beliefs or atheist, and they don't want to do Christmas programs. Well, we worked it all out. It took 30 or 40 years, but we worked it all out where we don't do that anymore. Well, a lot of people want to bring religion back into the classroom. It probably won't make it, but that's the public schools. I had a big problem with the TSA. I sued the federal government over them searching me and my children when the body scanners first rolled out in 2011. I filed a federal lawsuit, and it was dismissed because of some issue of having to bring it in the 10th Circuit, and I was preparing to refile it in the 10th Circuit, who ironically had original jurisdiction in any matter involving the TSA. But I didn't file it because I realized it's a public airport. I don't have any money. I don't have my own private jet. I wish I could rent a private jet or buy a ticket on a private jet, but I can't because I'm a poor person. So I have to go to the public airport and buy a reasonable ticket and put up with all of their so-called reasonable regulations. Now, I will say this. I was really behind schedule in a flight a couple of months ago, and I thought, I'm just going to go through the body scanner because I'm so late I'll never make it to the gate. And I got right up there to the moment of truth. And I say the same thing every time. I always go, can I go through the body scanner? And the guy goes, no, you have to go through the thing.
You mean metal detector?
Yeah, the metal detector. Yeah, can I go through the metal detector? And the guy says, no, you got to go through the body scanner. And I always ask twice. I go, oh, come on, just let me go. You've already let those other people. And when I'm with my children, they just walk us through. But when I'm by myself, they wanted me to go through that body scanner. And I always just say, no, I'm not going to do it. And they say, do you want to pat down? And I go, no, I don't want that either. And the guy says, you got to pick one. And I said, well, I'm not going through that. I just make them say it. And then they call out the guy, and I wait 5 minutes. And then ultimately, as a part of their process, they have this pass-through in your groin area. And it's very uncomfortable, and it's not right, and it's a violation of my human rights. They may have a right to regulate reasonably, even within the citizenship. But what TSA is doing is violating my human rights to touch my private area without my consent, and it's unreasonable to do it. But where do I enforce those rights? Well, I really don't have any place to enforce them. I could try to bring it back in federal court. Everybody that's tried has failed. Everybody that has tried to assert their rights against the TSA madness has failed. And it's very frustrating. But if you think about it, it's the public airport. Our rights are limited. We're voluntarily there. No one made us buy that plane ticket. We could have bought the $2,500 private ticket, but we bought the $350 public ticket on the private airline. But whose airport are you in? Well, here it's owned by the city and county of Denver. It's the international airport. But when you go into that secured section, well, you're moving into a federally secured area. So that's number 4. Who are you? Well, I'm a free and autonomous being. What are you? Well, I'm a United States citizen. Where are you? Well, I'm on my private land. I'm doing pretty good. Well, I'm not on my private land. It's kind of one or the other. Well, are you on someone else's private property? Is it sort of two people of equal status? Or are you in a public school? Or are you at a police station? Or are you at a private church? Or are you down getting your driver's license? Let's say you're down getting your driver's license. Those people don't treat us like the boss, but we are the boss. And if we just knew that in our mind when we start interacting with the guys and gals down at the DMV, well, then we just kind of have a whole different sense of how that interaction's going to go. Well, I'm in a public arena. I'm down at their office. I'm getting their little sticker. I'm paying my tax bill, but I'm still the boss. And they're still there to be pleasant to me. And it's the government that the citizenry, including me, created. They're by their own admission, public servant. And so, in that regard, all 4 have been completed. I'm a free and autonomous being. I'm a United States citizen. I'm on public property, meaning I don't have all my rights like I would at my house. And who am I interacting with? The state. So within that context, we can solve all problems. So we're going to take a little break, go back over those 4 principles, and dive into our issue concerning the class action case. And then from here on out, we won't cover that ground because it's within that context that literally every issue that you have in your life can be resolved.
A message from Save Our Suffrage. As you might remember, we are a 501c4 nonprofit organization, also doing business as Dominion Class Action, which was founded by plaintiffs and supporters like you. I speak for the team when I say that we are proud to bring you the Fielder Principle podcast and to share with you a message of peace, hope, and unity for the nation. It is all of our duties to respond to these attacks on our nation by peacefully advocating through the courts and legislatures for your constitutional right to vote, to organize grassroots activism, to peacefully defend every voter's civil rights, and to further educate and empower yourselves and every citizen of this great nation with the tools of justice and peace that each of us require to save our suffrage. We are extremely grateful for the continued support from you and so many other people who believe in working towards a fair and honest society where every vote is respected and treated equally under the law. Thank you for hanging in there with us. We will keep you posted as we continue this important work to save our suffrage and the work of Dominion Class Action. To all my fellow American heroes, the age of freedom has just begun. Be at peace.
Okay, thank you for returning. So let's review so that we can get into some of our issues here, and we'll start with the class action. 7 billion people on this earth are free and autonomous beings, and not all of them have autonomous control over their bodies or their life. Think of those poor people in those concentration camps in China. We should not be allowing that. What court can they go to? Where can they enforce their rights? How can we as a world, as just human beings, help them or in some way stop this? You could extend it to the prisoners associated with the January 6th situation. They should be able to vindicate their rights. They should be able to get reasonable bond. I personally, with due respect, think that their rights are being violated. If I had more time, I have a small practice. I'm doing jury trial after jury trial after jury trial. I'm working on the class action case. If I had any more time, I would try to involve myself in that situation, but I just can't. I just can't believe how badly their rights are being violated. It is a blight on this country. It is a mark against the freedoms that should be able to be expressed through this country. And even if you get charged, you should get reasonable bond, be able to go back to court. None of those people would go anywhere. Where would they go? What would they do? You mean they could get on the internet and talk about it amongst themselves or something like that? No. This is the federal government making a political point. This is retaliation for their protest, all of which was peaceful, none of which really interfered with the workings of government because they came right back to where they were and finished their work. However, all of us in our busy lives and in our inability to make connection with these individuals or talk to their lawyers or talk to anybody in power are just feeling helpless and embarrassed by this whole situation. So it's not always that easy to just think, I'm a United States citizen, I'm going to throw my power around, I'm going to be able to say whatever I want, I'm going to be able to arm myself, I'm going to be able to have counsel. Think about our clients with their attorneys being sanctioned for filing a lawsuit on their behalf trying to vindicate their rights. Are they receiving right to counsel? Are they receiving due process? Were their rights violated when they exercised their First Amendment right to vote? Which they did, and it was likely counted, but did it really matter? In Colorado, did it matter if you voted or not? It felt good to vote. And so let's go over that process, because it's very interesting. Every one of us in Colorado that have a right to vote, and as we talked about, not all of us do. There's plenty of United States citizens that choose not to vote. And that's their right. Not to vote, not even to register to vote. That's their right. There are some people who can't register to vote because there are laws outlawing them from registering to vote, such as prior felons. If you are not a citizen of the United States, most states have laws against that person registering to vote and then voting. So if you are voting, you have to be alive for you. So you are free and autonomous because you're alive. You have to be a citizen of the United States. Now, where are you? That's the issue. Well, you think you're in a public school because that's where the election's being held. So you're in the gymnasium. No. When you pull that curtain and you start looking at that ballot, you are in a private area. Maybe not your private property, but you are in a private area. And you're about ready to make a private decision on a private ballot. And if you're mailing in that ballot, you're likely making it from the privacy of your own living room. And you are expressing your sovereignty in the most significant way. In the old days, who appointed all the judges? Who appointed the earls or the dukes? Who appointed those people? The king, the sovereign. You didn't get to vote for those individuals. They were appointed by the sovereign. And even where that duty was delegated by the king chose the sheriffs. The king chose the magistrates. And even where that power was delegated, its root was in the king. So even if a duke could appoint underlings, well, the duke's power was dependent upon the sovereign power. So when you're voting, even though you're voting with all of your fellow citizens, that's the expression of your sovereign power to choose the public servants who are creating the government. And think about the magistrate. No one voted in the magistrate that sanctioned me or dismissed the case. However, theoretically, the president should be honestly elected. The president, in conjunction with the United States Senate, all of them should be honestly elected. Appoint federal judges. The chief judge can appoint the magistrate, but its root is still back to the election of the president and your U.S. senators. So that power of voting is probably the most important expression of sovereignty that a citizen has. And in terms of a national election, there is only one, and that's for the President and Vice President of the United States. This upcoming election, the so-called midterm election, you are re-electing or electing a new United States representative. You're re-electing or electing a new United States senator. They're being sent to the federal government. Really, a United States senator and a representative should be in their representative capacity for the whole country. That's sort of a political argument, but of course they're also there as representatives of their state. But the vote itself is only within the state. Montana's election is totally different than Colorado's election, which is totally different than Texas's election, which is totally different than Oklahoma's elections, and every other state election. So all the senators are being chosen by the separate states. Only the president and vice president are elected on a national basis, where, and look at the access to the ballot. When you look at the presidential election, you have all those different parties and they all have access to the ballot. Well, it's a beautiful thing. So with regard to our lawsuit, you are talking about voters who are United States citizens who are interacting with a federal court, trying to exercise and vindicate their rights, and they're being told that they have no standing, and they're being told that their lawyers are frivolous. So see how within that context it's resolved by our formula. These are citizens. Where are they? Well, they are in a private area. And who are they interacting with? The state. Because you can only interact with the state when you talk about elections. And so that's the point. Dominion Voting Systems, Inc. is a state actor. Facebook, in its involvement in the election as the alter ego of Mark Zuckerberg, who's the CEO and funded CTCL, who directly involved itself into the electoral process, all are traceable state actors. That opened up the Constitution. That gave the standing to our clients to complain. That gave our clients the ability to hire counsel to bring the lawsuit. And I guess if we're wrong, then we'll pay the price. But otherwise, we're all dependent upon these government-appointed or elected district attorneys or attorney generals from the state or the Department of Justice to act on behalf of the people. And if they don't do it, are you telling me that the people are completely powerless to take this matter into their own hands? Well, the only way to avoid that is to just call the subject matter frivolous, to call the evidence frivolous, to call the lawyers frivolous, to impose sanctions, to scare everybody away. So we're going to keep fighting and we're going to keep doing this. And so from here on out, we're not going to refer to really in as much detail with regard to these 4 elements that need to be answered in every conflict that you have in your life. We'll just start working on the issues and working on the problems. Because if you view any problem that you have in government, you can resolve it through the answer to those 4 scenarios. But in the end, it's all dependent upon one citizen, one vote, winner wins. I can't believe we're not having runoffs for these senatorial primaries, which maybe many of us really didn't pay attention until now. But we're seeing a lot of these primaries being resolved by plurality. One candidate gets 23%, another candidate gets 27%, another candidate gets 24%, and then the rest is split up among 2 or 3 people. Well, the person getting 28% wins the nomination. Well, you could say, well, why wouldn't they have a runoff between the top 2? Well, that's up to that party in that state. They could, but then they'd have to have another election. Well, all of this is solvable. The school boards and their ability to impose all of this critical legal scholarship onto the population can be resolved through the election of new school board members. So it's not about the ideology. It's just being able to elect the school board that the people want. But if we don't have an electoral process that guarantees that the winner wins, well, then now we're suffering the consequences of that. Not only do we have school boards that likely weren't elected, no one has confidence that they were elected, even if they were. So even if Dominion is right, and we're just frivolous, and they counted every vote perfectly, no one trusts you. No one trusts you because you're not transparent, because all of it's hidden, because all of it's in secret. So who are you to say that I'm wrong? Because I'm certainly right about that. No one trusts you, and you are state actors. So for the associate that's listening to this, you've already read the brief, so you know what the issues are. But I think they know in their heart that it's not frivolous. And I think they know in their heart that we have standing. And I think they know in their heart that they engaged in state action. And they're going to do everything they can to destroy me. And they're going to do everything they can to destroy our clients and Mr. Walker and this idea. And they certainly scared everybody off because we've been blackballed from the start, and that continues. But we're not going to give up. And I don't think any of you are either. So as I've said before, hang in there. We're still fighting for you. And we'll see you around the corner. Thank you.
And it's there I'll stay and shall persist till the world sees this injustice. Power to the people I will lament. The bank should not run the government. Yeah, I better be prepared to stay there for a while.